What makes the moon orbit? Well, some would say it's gravity, and others would say centripetal force. Well, it's actually both. Centripetal force makes the moon orbit. Isaac Newton formulated his theory of gravity when he was self-isolating during the Great Plague of 1665 to 1667. He spent 2 years on the family farm away from everybody else, and to pass his time, he discovered what we now call Newton's three laws, and also Newton's law of gravity. Well, Newton said that gravity is what holds the moon in orbit around the Earth, and he came up with the formula that the gravity is equal to big G, the universal gravity constant, the mass of the Earth and the mass of the moon, divided by the distance between the centers of the two celestial planets. Well, we know that the moon travels in a near circular orbit, so that means that centripetal force is required to move the moon in a circle. So centripetal force provides the gravitational force. So centripetal force is equal to the gravitational force. So we can take those two formulas and equate them to one another. So the mass of the moon times its velocity squared divided by the distance between the centers of the moon and the Earth is equal to big G times the mass of the Earth times the mass of the moon divided by that distance squared. Now, of course, we can simplify. You can see that the mass of the moon actually doesn't really matter. And we can reduce the r in the formula, and we're left with this formula: V is equal to the square root of G, mass of the Earth divided by the distance between their centers, all square rooted. Now, we call this the orbital speed. So for the moon to orbit the Earth at a distance of r, it must have a velocity of v, and we call that orbital speed. So the orbital speed of any satellite, not just the moon, it could be weather satellites, the satellites used by DirecTV, the space station, spy satellites, GPS satellites. And it also includes space junk, which is in orbit around the Earth, spent pieces of rocket, asteroids in the asteroid belts, of course planets, and they all follow the formula V of the satellite is equal to G, M of the mass at the center, so the Earth at the center of the moon's orbit, or the sun at the center of Earth's orbit, divided by the distance between their centers. Now, engineers use the formula to design the orbit of all artificial satellites. They decide the altitude of the satellite, and then they calculate the speed required. A rocket then carries the satellite, and it releases the satellite once the rocket reaches the desired altitude and the required speed. So they just kind of push it out of the rocket. Now note that the mass of the satellite is not a factor affecting the speed.